But let's go a bit more into policy maybe when we talk about India. So the key question, I think, for most of you who look at the IMF's World Economic Outlook, if you open the newspaper one day and next in October and you see the next outlook is what does it mean for India? So let us just try and break this down a little bit. As I mentioned before, we saw the number for 2017 that India was a bit of an outlier in the sense that growth slowed. The culprits, we know what these are: demonetization and also the GST has affected activity. And this chart here, which is the Purchasing Manager Index for manufacturing and services, shows kind of this double whammy, how it affected activity. But in a way, we see that the impact is gradually being left behind. So that's a positive step. Therefore, let's think about how the external environment will affect growth going forward. And generally, we think about three main channels how the global environment affects India's economy. And the first one is the real channel. It's really exports for foreign trade for India. Of course, we can look at it from the perspective of export demand. And here we just, what I plot here is the real growth forecast of India's export partners. So we just kind of use their growth rates and weigh them by their share in India's exports and see, how the growth rate of India's trading partners, export partners, is moving. Of course, the idea is that if growth is high in India's export markets, there should be more purchasing power to buy Indian goods. So this is a bit of an indication of how much foreign demand, how supportive foreign demand will be. And we'll see that in the short term, there's a pickup in growth in India's export partners. So that should be supportive of India's exports. But if you look further out, you see also that growth rate really is leveling off. So there's not too much momentum there. And especially also if you compare it again to an average of before the crisis, you'll see that growth rates will settle at a lower level than they were before the crisis. So in that sense, as I said, there is some pull from the outside that India can benefit from in the short term. But in the medium term, really, India cannot count on strong tailwinds to drive its exports. And that has to do in part with the fact that India is trading a lot with the old world. And remember when we looked at the medium-term outlook for advanced economies, we said that these economies are currently growing faster, but they will fall back to a lower growth level because their potential is productivity growth has slowed, and also these economies are aging. So there's a challenge here. Of course, there is potential. You can open new markets, you can win market share, but at least just from a static perspective, I think India cannot kind of bank on a lot of pull from its export partners. It'll have to work its way up here. So the other channel is on the import side, is commodities, of course, which are very important for India. India is one of the largest, if not the largest, oil importer in the world. And if we look at commodity prices have increased. And for this year, we anticipate actually for 2018, just because of the averaging of the statistical effect, we expect oil prices to be roughly about 18% higher than the 2017 average. So there's a bit of a drag for India in the current year from higher oil prices. You see on the left side how the crude oil basket for India has increased in terms of the price, and that's of course a concern. Maybe the better news is that if we look at global commodity markets, we don't see this upside swing to continue. Much of the current upswing in oil prices, we believe, comes from the supply side, of supply restrictions, essentially, and some of them should ease. Also in the medium term, remember that we said that medium term growth is not going to pick up as much, and so also the demand side therefore should not be too strong. So our sense is that commodity prices in the medium term should stabilize, and so actually for if we look at 2018 and 19 together, for India the effect on its income should be broadly balanced. So after a pickup in 2018, 2019, on average there should be some decline, and therefore we don't think it's a big factor, except for a little bit of a drag in the current year. And then the third factor, or the third channel of transmission of global economic trends onto India is the financial sector. India's economy is financially open, capital account is open, there are some restrictions left, but still it is a fairly open regime. FDI is practically open, except for some sectors. Equity investments, portfolio investments are quite open. There are some restrictions on fixed income investment and on foreign borrowing, commercial borrowing, but still India is connected to the rest of the world, and so swings in global capital flows also affect India, as we learned in 2013 in the so-called taper tantrum, when there was a big outflow of capital, and India's currency actually depreciated quite strongly. As I mentioned before, there is some potential for volatility in the process of monetary normalization. So the question really we have to ask ourselves, well, if this volatility materializes, how well is India prepared to weather that? And let me just say upfront, I think no emerging market economy is completely immune, but the question is, how exposed are you, or how vulnerable would a country be to a sharp slowdown or even reversal of capital flows? And in that area, I think India is probably in a better shape today than it used to be in 2013. Here you see a chart. It's not fully updated, but still, I think broadly okay. This shows what we call the external financing requirements. It's the sum of the country's short-term debt and the current account deficit. In a way, these are potential outflows of foreign currency, and you see that India, which is somewhere, did I mark it somewhere? Yes, I did. Is kind of the level of financing requirements among emerging markets is somewhere in the middle of the pack. Is generally seen as reasonable. Current account has been widening a little bit recently, so the trend of this has been to weaken a bit. But still, certainly a much better position than we were in 2013, when the current account deficit was almost 5% of GDP. And foreign direct investment, which is a more stable source of financing, was also considerably lower. So that is, I think, positive, or at least India is in a better position to withstand any vulnerability there. On the other hand, also reserve adequacy has increased, and is actually at the upper end, or even somewhere above the band, the adequacy range, what we think is a good level of reserves. So also the defenses or buffers on that front have been strengthened. So in that sense, at least, I would say India is better prepared if there is global financial volatility. But of course, such volatility would still be negative for the country. It's not that you could go by unscathed. Sorry, that was too fast. So where does it leave us in our forecast? So we feel that 2017 was a bottom in terms of growth. This is fiscal year 17-18, and we're going to see a gradual increase in India's growth rate. The external environment, as we've seen it, is kind of a bit mixed looking forward. As I said, external demand may be positive in the short term, but not so great in the medium term. Commodity prices, not so great in the short term, but probably okay in the medium term. Financial volatility, India stands in a better position than it was before, but it would still hurt itself. So basically the external environment is looking, it gives a mixed picture, and really where we're going to end up in terms of growth in the medium term, that really will depend, I think, largely to what's happening inside of the country. So what potential a country can achieve depends on the domestic reforms. I always like to say that structural reforms for India are a marathon, not a sprint. India needs a continuous sequence of structural reforms, improving the functioning of factor markets, labor markets, land markets, addressing infrastructure gaps, still facilitating competition in many sectors. Some good progress has been made. GST, and despite some hiccups in the short term, will certainly help integrate the domestic market. The reforms of the Insolvency and Bankruptcy Act certainly a step in the positive direction to help improve, the recycling of stranded assets, of the creative destruction, how Schumpeter calls it. So these will be positive for productivity growth, we think, and this is partly why you see here in our forecast an increase in medium-term growth. But there's much more that has to be done, and therefore where we're going to end up in terms of medium-term growth, it's going to be around 8%. It's going to be somewhat below that, or it can be even more than 8%. It will really depend on the pace of reform. So our slogan is keep reforming, and there is plenty to do in that area to really keep growth high and even increase it further, which is certainly what India can do. So the potential is there, but to materialize that potential, policy action will be needed. So I think I stop there. I have a few slides more. So this is just a summary, if I can leave on. I have a few slides more at the end, where I'm just going to tell you a little bit what kind of resources we have that you might find interesting. But I want to stop here and invite some questions if we have any.
So after 2008 and phenomenon of Brexit and the election of Trump, right? Do you see, this has been a backlash against globalization. So how do you see the future? Because from what I read, the globalization stopped after the crossover of ideas, goods, services, and just before people. Right? So how do you see it?
Yeah, it's a retreat from globalization.
So we do see that risk. And it's a complex issue. So globalization has, of course, there's been a big increase in integration in terms of, if you look at the share of global trade has been rising even more. The share of financial integration has been rising even faster. And even migration, I've seen some data that showed that actually even migration has increased. And after the global crisis, there's been a bit of a leveling off of those trends. So I don't think that we have seen a large drop-off so far. But certainly, that sharp acceleration, that some call it hyper-globalization, that we saw in, say, 10 or 20 years before the global crisis, that has kind of leveled off. Now, the issue is that, of course, there has been concern about the negative implication of globalization on especially issues such as equality or inequality, rising inequality, and the issue of jobs, etc. I do think that if you look at globalization globally, it's been a phenomenal success story. If you look at global inequality across countries, over the last 2 or 3 decades has fallen dramatically. So there has been catch-up. The global trading system has allowed emerging market and developing economies to really raise their potential and to kind of converge in terms of income to advanced economies. What we do see is that in many countries, especially in advanced economies, the in-country inequality has risen. So you see that, for example, in the United States, that the median labor income has not been growing much. Now there is a lot of work out there, and it's still ongoing, about what has been driving this. You see that manufacturing jobs have been falling. There's a chapter in the World Economic Outlook about the implications or the trends in manufacturing labor and implications for inequality. In fact, we're going to have, if I can pass on a little publicity here, we'll have a seminar on Monday at the Brookings Institution where the author of that chapter will be talking about this. So the concern that manufacturing jobs are falling. Manufacturing jobs often have been good jobs, high productivity jobs, and the question is whether they're falling, or if in cases like India, they're never coming actually, where you peak very early. And does it mean that countries are in a way condemned to low productivity growth and thus lower growth rates? The answer we have in the chapter is no, that you can have in the services sectors also high productivity jobs, and that the issue is really that you have to facilitate the labor market and labor, we have to prepare labor for these jobs. But if we look at some of these trends, if you look at manufacturing trends, I think most of the studies, what they find is that that many of these trends, especially the decline in the share of manufacturing employment, they have more to do with technological change than they have to do really with globalization. And you can see that even if you look, for example, at Germany, which is a country that's done very well in its external trade, right, has current account surpluses. Even their manufacturing jobs have been declining for a long time. So there's been a long-term trend. It's not been something that's just. But I think so. In general, we are very supportive of an open world, of an integrated world. We see lots of economic benefits there. But we're also mindful that, in a dynamic world, there are displacements, industries move around, and countries need to acknowledge that and probably need to do a better job in also helping the adjustment and helping those who are displaced to find, different occupations. This is about lifelong learning, about retraining, reskilling, etc., etc. So it is a concern, and it probably requires more policy attention. But I think we have to be careful, and if we look to not confuse what is causing what here. And we do think that in general, many of the trends that are creating concerns, such as I said, higher inequality, etc., have probably less to do with globalization than with technological change. And there are policy instruments to address them, and they should be deployed.
One more question I have is that after globalization, right, as you said, the inequality within the advanced countries increased, right? There's a paper pointing out that the top 1% in the advanced countries have gained, and the middle class in China and India have gained. Right? These are the two groups which have gained most of globalization. And one of the products of this was that the consumer demand, especially in countries like India, is going to pick up in the near future. So how do you see that impacting manufacturing in countries like India?
Yeah, this is the Milanovic elephant charter. What is it? It's called elephant. I asked that we've gone through different animals, and some people have redrawn this with different data slots. But yeah, I mean, I think in general, one of the concerns that we have with rising inequality is precisely that inequality is not just a concern from an ethical point of view. You can have a debate about to what extent a moral or more. It's not just a moral question. Actually, there are economic arguments that give you a good reason to be concerned about it. And one of those is that if inequality rises, that has implications for issues like consumption levels. And so typically higher income households have they save much more, and therefore if their income rises, that means that consumption is not going to rise as fast as it could if the increase in income was more evenly spread. So you might have shortfalls of domestic demand in those cases. So these are relevant concerns. I think our advice has been to use fiscal policies in those cases to address some of these concerns. Fiscal policies in terms of one, endowing workers across the income spectrum with tools that will increase their productivity and therefore allow them to earn more. So this goes to strengthening education, strengthening skilling, etc. But also has to do with redistribution, and the IMF has been quite vocal in terms of looking at tax reforms also from a redistributive manner. So we are not. We've done some work showing that you can have progressive tax systems without really materially affecting growth projects. So as long as you remain in a reasonable range, there is not a big trade-off between redistribution and efficiency. Of course, when you start rising tax rates a lot, those distortions rise also more than linearly, as we know. But so we think that there are policy tools to address, especially the equity issues, and there's a good economic rationale to do that as well.
One last question I have is, in the recent EU elections, right, we saw different perspectives regarding TPP, the Trans-Pacific Partnership. Right, in the lead up to the elections, we saw Trump opposing TPP, Bernie Sanders of the Democratic Party opposing TPP, whereas Hillary Clinton and the Obama government, they supported TPP, right? So how do you see this going forward? Right? Recently it came the news that Trump actually now went back to the support of TPP, and even in the Democratic front, there are two different forces. One led by Sanders and one led by Clinton. So how do you see going forward?
So I think I will not comment on the domestic politics of the United States, but let me say it maybe another way. So I think we're very, very supportive of broader efforts of opening the international trading system and keeping it open, and therefore I think any efforts that go into that direction are welcome. Again, we like to think that it's very important to keep this a multilateral effort. I mean, of course, any countries that want to open up individually, they'll be welcome as well, or bilaterally. But these broader agreements, they can help create momentum in the global trade order, and therefore we welcome them. I think the IMF has been quite vocal in the sense that we think that retreat from a free trading system will be detrimental for all involved, and both for consumers and producers as well. Sometimes the consumers are forgotten in this whole equation. I think it's important to remember that much of the real income gains also have to do with contained prices and many of those and broader opportunities for consumption, and they come with global trade. And global trade has made that possible. So again, the IMF is very supportive of all these efforts. I always say the more the merrier, so from that perspective, I think continued efforts in liberalizing trade among many, hopefully among all, will always be welcomed by the fund and supported by the fund.
So, with regard to the realization of the full employment potential, as we are seeing the challenges of AI in the manufacturing sector, so where do you see the potential for realizing that full employment lies? Is it maybe skill development, or maybe with regard to better human resource development, which can lead the way in this direction?
Yeah, that's the $1 million question that everybody is asking. I guess I'm not an expert in this area, and I will say that we at the fund also are kind of investing in learning more and thinking about what these new technologies can mean, both on the financial side, but also on the real side. At least personally, I think I haven't seen a convincing answer yet. So I guess there are some more optimistic views in that pointing to that in the past often technological change ultimately has actually led to more employment, or at least to better employment. But of course there are also views that this wave of technological change might be more labor replacing than others that we had before. I think what
it's not labor displacing. Automation, it's not labor displacing. This artificial intelligence, or it's inducing.
Yeah. So I think there's a debate about that. And so I will not take I don't think we have taken a view on this. But I think what is clear is that first of all, I always say this: there are relative prices involved, not in economics. It's the price of labor and price of capital. So and ultimately the relative price of labor. When you look at it, you look at it in terms of also the productivity of labor. So it's an output, it's a cost per output, and in that sense, I think an area where you definitely can intervene already now, even before we have made up our mind and have understood completely where this is leading, is we do know that we need to have competitive labor markets, and we need to have also employable labor. So there's the issue of really having a trained labor force and a skilled labor force becomes essential. And to bring this back to the Indian context, I think employability in India is one of the big factors really that is also affecting labor market performance. So the question is, productivity adjusted wages, are they really so low as we think or not? And I think a key area of policy intervention is really to strengthen education and strengthen the whole system of labor skilling as well. And there is, if you look at the limited data that's available about educational outcome, for example, the ACER survey, I think they're quite scathing in terms of what the average level of basic competencies is. So even if you think about that automation might not be labor replacing, and what is certain that even today many simple jobs require the operation of some sort of technology. And if you of course don't have the basic abilities to say read and understand an instruction, to do some kind of basic mathematical computations, then you'll have a hard time to really be employable in that context. And so I think I always like to say, let's go back to basics, start with the basics. I think a strong focus on basic education and on also labor skilling is certainly key. India already has some elite institutions in terms of also tertiary education, IITs, IIMs, etc. And that is of course important, but it's kind of lifting all the boats. I think that is key here also to address the labor challenge, along with other. So here we address the supply side of labor also, having strong supply, and then of course on the demand side also there are the other reforms in terms of easing business environment and addressing some of the regulatory cholesterol, as Manish Sabral uses to say, and those things. So they're kind of helping the labor market to function, etc. So I think these are the interventions, independent of where we come out. I think with on the technology side, how it affects. I think these are things we should do anyway. So in my mind is I'm not losing sleep. Today and trying to figure where I come out on both sides, but because I do know what has to be done anyway, and I think, of course, there are bigger questions afterwards that arise, have to do with redistribution, etc. And I think that debate is ongoing, and we at the fund are still working on those as well.
Sir, we talked about the rebalancing in China, about the service sector share rising. We also know that China is ultimately an export-oriented economy. So, and export-oriented economies are ultimately dependent on the demand in the foreign countries. So, are we saying that when we are seeing the calls for trade war, are all these symptomatic of ultimately demand of higher consumption in China? So, are we saying that higher consumption in China may be a solution to these trade wars?
Well, I wouldn't put all the weight on China here. I mean, certainly. So one of the things we do worry about is global imbalances, how we call it. Current account imbalances across the world, and trade imbalances are a good part of that. To be fair, I mean, China's external imbalances have narrowed quite a bit, and in fact, so over the years, because precisely. The country has moved from external demand to more domestic demand, and that has come also with the increase in services. So, there's more consumption of services domestically, and that has essentially helped reduce those external demands. So, I mean, definitely, excess trade and current account imbalances are always risky, and we generally advise to reduce those. If you look today, actually, in terms of the external imbalances, some of the European countries have fairly large imbalances. And our advice on those countries has been, you have fiscal space and you have external space to increase domestic investment, invest in your infrastructure, invest in your workers, and that would help actually reduce some of these external surpluses as well. And again, in the current circumstances, it might have the collateral benefit, apart from a stability concern, that it will also maybe ease some of these anxieties. But I think we have to be very careful if you think about trade. We should not expect a world in which all countries have balanced trade with everybody. And that if we go back to such a world, which is that will be, of course, a world where a lot of efficiency will be lost. And it's very easy for you to imagine that. Just imagine a little island and imagine they will produce everything for themselves. So if you could not specialize, of course, lots of efficiency gains and productivity gains that the world has made over the last many years would be lost. So I think that there should not be an expectation that all trade balances, all trade is always balanced. You will always have surplus with some and deficit with others. You also have to look at the services side, not just the goods side. So I mean, it's part of a healthy, I think, global trading system. But of course, excessive imbalances are always a concern, and there are institutions, global institutions on the trade side to ensure also that trade is fair. And if there are concerns that there are, some trading practices are not fair, there are instruments to pursue those under the WTO, etc. So what the IMF really likes is a rules-based system that will ensure, advantageous trade across all members.
Sir, given the rising inequality, I read somewhere about the suggestions of tax rates as high as 70%, 80% as they used to prevail in the 1980s or 70s. There were also suggestions about wealth tax. Sir, what do you think about that?
It's a tax terrorism.
Well, I'm not sure that we certainly we favor a progressive tax system. I'm not sure that 70% rate would be something that many of our teams would recommend. And I mean, remember one thing is that the distortion of a tax rises exponentially with its rate. So you have to be a bit careful that as you rise the rate, the efficiency loss increases more dramatically. And in terms of income taxes, of course, one of the concerns always that high income tax rates also discourage savings, which is important to support investment as well. So I'm not sure we would go to the extreme, but I do think we have done some work in the past that showed that at reasonable rates, a progressive tax system does not really have a big efficiency loss at all. So we would certainly support that, and there are some countries where there is scope to improve the progressiveness of the tax system. I think the IMF has expressed some concern about also the impact, for example, of the latest U.S. tax reform in that respect. That it provides more benefits to higher income individuals. So I think there are tools there. But also, I think progressiveness of a fiscal system, we should always not just look at one side. So you can generate some progressiveness on the revenue side, but there's a lot and possibly even more scope to have a progressive expenditure side, which is to ensure that the spending side benefits proportionally more those who have lower incomes. And in many countries, and this is not just in advanced economies, but especially also in emerging economies, you still see that there's some of the spending is actually very regressive. Especially one of the areas we've pointed out is energy subsidies, fuel subsidies, which generally benefit the richer segments of the population much more than the poorer segments. Fortunately, India has made a lot of progress on that front already, but there are other aspects. In general, I would say kind of price subsidies are generally not a very efficient instrument to provide support to lower income groups, and you can replace those with direct support instruments, or at least instruments that are somehow categorically targeted. And so you can generate efficiency gains there. You can improve the progressiveness of your fiscal policy also by addressing the quality of your spending side. So this is actually a big also an area that we've given advice for some time, that both use budget policy, the spending policy, to address better some of these equity concerns, but also to address to support reforms that will improve the country's growth potential, which is again another policy that will help on the social side, generating more growth. So infrastructure investment, for example, is a big area of where more can be done in many countries.
Okay.
So, with regard to the context of inequality, rising inequality, would you say trickle-down economics has not worked? Especially as you see in the US politics, right? They're giving tax cuts to the rich. So it basically does mean a little bit trickle-down.
That's a big statement. I'm not sure we like big statements. So I mean, in what sense I would argue here? I would say that we do see a role for active fiscal policies to support, also distributional outcomes. So there, I think, as I said, progressive tax systems. I think our teams generally get concerned if we see tax systems that are not very progressive, and they won't advise more progressive tax systems. Our teams get concerned when we see budget spending that is kind of tilted toward the rich and not providing a good safety nets, and also not providing opportunities, because when you have poor public schools, weak outcomes in public schools, poor health system, that really goes back to the point that you're not providing opportunities to the lower income segments that depend on those services. So I think in that sense, yes, we recognize, of course, that the state has a role in supplementing the outcomes that essentially the market economy might produce. But the state also has a role, of course, in regulating the market economy on top of that. So we haven't talked about that, but there's also an active role for the state to regulate, so that some of these outcomes might be avoided in the first place. It might not be the natural outcome of economic activity as well. So we do see there's a role for the state for sure.
So we'll stop here for now. Thank you, Mr. Andreas, for an insightful discussion and also highlighting some few points from the report. So that's it, and thank you for taking your time to come over here and discuss things. So that's all for the session. We'll close it.
Sorry, I forgot. I have 3 slides I want to show you quickly about IMF resources. In case you want to read more, if you're interested, or if you actually for your work you might need something. So first of all, the IMF used to be a fairly, I don't want to say opaque, but at least discreet institution where we deliberated in our executive board and wrote a lot of documents that were duly filed in some drawer and never saw the light of day outside of our building. That has changed a lot. So today almost every document that we produce is being published. We provide an enormous amount of data on our website. So imf.org, if you have any issue related to macroeconomics, can be a good starting point for you. If if you want to compare some basic data across countries especially, we have a vast data set. The World Economic Outlook has a vast data set for all members. And it's very easily accessible and accessible for free there. So I encourage you to go there if there's any any issue. Again, the World Economic Outlook, the document is available for free and on our website as well. We have a magazine called Finance and Development, which is a bit more kind of talks about economic issues, but in a more accessible way as well. So if you have only a fleeting interest in economics, you might even find that useful. All of that is available on our website. So data and documents, there's a lot there. We have a few local information resources as well here from our India team. Our Twitter provides mostly links to kind of slightly more curated output of the IMF. We produce a lot of documents, so if you don't want to get everything but something that is more important or interested or geared toward, say, South Asia or India, you can follow our Twitter account. You can go to our office website as well. And then this is really for those who are really kind of more involved and more interested in economics issues. We do have free online courses that we've started, massive open online courses that provide some kind of basic tools to do economic analysis and to understand the economy. Our classic is a so-called financial programming course that really goes through all the different sectors, external sector, fiscal sector, monetary sector, real sector, and looks at the interlinkages between those sectors in the economy. We have a course on financial market analysis, and then we have some more policy-oriented course, like here I showed an example, energy subsidy reform. These courses, I think, aren't too long, maybe 8 weeks, a few hours per week. But if you're interested, that's another resource that might be helpful for you. That's all.